Welcome to Heart of the Wild, the podcast where we explore the wonders of wildlife, the beauty of animal behavior, and the people that are devoted to helping our planet's most extraordinary creatures. Today's guest is someone who has quietly but profoundly helped to reshape how animals are cared for in zoos by teaching zookeepers all over Europe how to train animals for improved welfare using industry-recognized standards. If you have had a negative view of animals in zoos, as I candidly have had, I do think it would be very worth your time to listen to this episode. Jim Mackie has spent over 27 years at the Zoological Society of London, and in that time has supported welfare and behavioral management for animals under human care. In 2013, he became ZSL's first ever Animal Behavior Management Officer. That's a role I didn't even know existed, and a role that formalized work that had never been previously done at this scale or with this level of scientific rigor. Jim is responsible for training and enrichment across two zoos, the London Zoo and the Whipsnade Zoo. It's a privilege to welcome someone whose work has helped to fundamentally change what modern ethical zoo care can look like. So that's a lot of what we can be chatting about. And I'm very privileged to welcome Jim Mackie.
What an intro. Thank you so much.
I mean, that is all the work you've been doing. So thank you for that already and cannot wait to dive into things. So let's just get right into it, Jim.
Sure.
I just want to state the obvious in the fact that a lot of the listeners that are coming to the show are coming because they're huge animal lovers. Mm-hmm. And I think there could be some skepticism behind animals being kept in captive care and animals in zoos. So can you tell me about the work that you're doing and how it does help to shape the future lives of animals and better the lives of animals in your care?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a justified, reservation like you were talking about before. People can be skeptical of animals in zoos. That's fine. I'm absolutely prepared to have those discussions with people. And I think working on the inside for so long, for 27 years, across one institution, which has two zoos, London and Whipsnade, I think I'm really in a really good position to sort of see beyond, what people may just perceive as the problems in zoos. So zoos have just transformed in the last 2 decades, particularly, and part of that transformation is because we know more now. It's really easy to criticize the way that we may have looked after animals in the past, but that's just because we didn't really have the scientific knowledge and understanding that we do now. It wasn't that long ago, pre-Pavlov, that we didn't even think animals could think or behave or choose to behave. And then Skinner came along and we have all of this amazing science now to help us understand how animals act upon their environment. And it's a really profound change that's happened. It's taken quite a long time for zoos to fully embrace that understanding of the scientific principles of behavior change. But now we are, and we're seeing this, this seismic change in the way we look after animals in the zoos. And I think that it's worth giving it a try. Come to see us, speak to us who look after animals. One thing I would say is I'm absolutely privileged to have worked alongside some of the most amazing people that I've ever had the privilege to meet that look after animals, and they dedicate their entire lives. This isn't a 9-to-5 Monday to Friday job. They live it, breathe it. Everything they do and think about is how they can improve the lives of their animals and their care. And I think we're in zoos. We're really doing some amazing work. We're not just looking after animals. We're not just welcoming visitors into these zoos to sometimes see animals that they're never going to see in the wild because there's some of the animals we look after are extinct in the wild. Particularly things like some of the fish that we look after and birds actually. So there's these animals that the people are never going to see. So they come to our zoos. They get a real big understanding, a passion for these animals, and then they might become naturalists. Conservationists, the future conservationists come to our zoos, and so that we're having that profound impact on people visiting our zoos. But then we're also doing incredible work. So ZSL is pretty unique, but it's not totally unique. There are loads and loads of other zoos that do incredible work, but I think ZSL's reach is amazing. Yes, so recently we had this incredible event at London Zoo, at ZSL London Zoo, where called One ZSL. and it was our 200th celebration conference where we brought colleagues from all over the world together to share their stories and experiences. And of course, we're just one small part of that work in our zoos. You know, we work day to day with our animals. We get fully immersed and engrossed in that experience, trying to, improve the lives of our animals, breed them for conservation purposes, and then share these wonderful experiences with our visitors. But it was amazing to hear what the money that we generate through the Zoological Society of London, what impact it's having out in the wild. You know, we're working with mangrove swamps, protecting species all over the world, critically endangered species. We've got this program called EDGE, which is all about evolutionary distinct animals. So it's just, you know, working for London Zoo, and I've been at London and Whipsnade Zoo all this time, but our reach is far wider than just those two, zoological collections of animals. One thing I'm super proud of actually is that ZSL was the very first ever scientific zoo. So what I was talking about before with this, sort of, now that we're embracing and trying to shape the way we look after animals using behaviour science, the principles of behaviour science, this isn't new to ZSL. We've always been a scientific organisation. You know, one of our fellows was Darwin, for example. So, you know, that's pretty good.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually really lovely to hear. You talk about how passionate people are that are working in zoos. It's not a 9-to-5 job for anyone. It's like their life's work, it sounds like. And it's been your life's work, really. And I actually am curious to hear about how you're actually implementing it, like the tangible things that you're doing on the ground in the zoo to implement some of this incredible work. And also, for anyone that's not as familiar, I mentioned this in the beginning, but ZSL, as I say in American, ZSL.
ZSL, yeah. Sorry.
I like Z. I need to pick that up as I'm now living in London for a long time. That is the Zoological Society of London, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
For anyone that's not familiar with that acronym, because I'm sure we'll talk about it quite a bit more. But if you could talk a little bit about those tangible changes you've made and the evolution of the more conservation-based, research-based, behavioral-based work you're doing in the zoo, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, my sort of passion, if you like, is individual animal welfare. You know, the more wide-reaching work that we do in conservation research and species recovery, I'm really interested in that. I actually became interested in working in zoos because I was interested in conservation. I'm interested in how we can protect species. And it is no secret that as humanity grows and, things like habitat loss, climate change, all these hugely significant, impactful crises that we're now experiencing, we need to really be doubling down and focusing on what is going to work for the long-term future of species in the world. You know, so I got into zoos that way, but over the course of my time working in a zoo, I actually became far more interested in the individual minutiae of looking after animals. And so my passion is really how we can make that animal better, not on a population level. However, we are lucky, again, at ZSL, having this, capacity, this huge capacity for collaboration. So just a couple of examples of the way that we've used our understanding and application of behaviour science to help our colleagues in conservation research and species recovery. So first of all, I want to talk about human-wildlife conflicts. It's a huge deal. You know, as populations grow, we're working in lots of different locations around the world to try and mitigate the impacts of human-animal conflict. For example, there's this term rogue elephants. And rogue elephants, it's like a label. Mm-hmm. It's a behavior, it's a human construct. What is a rogue animal? They're just doing their thing. They're just getting by, right? So these rogue elephants, bull elephants, were invading, food stores in villages in Kenya and breaking down barriers, finding places to find water resource and food resource. And then when you look at it through the lens of behavior science, you can really see that those animals are just, operating on the environment. They're just trying to gain valued outcomes. If it's an easier source of reinforcement, positive reinforcement of food and water in that location, just because it belongs to a person, they don't know that. Mm-hmm. And it might not be that that's available in their own wild environment. So we were able to discuss that, talk about that, and all of our conservation experts out in the field can then take that information back with them and maybe modify the way that those grain stores are kept, for example. Maybe they're going to bury them underground rather than having on the surface. Maybe they'll dig a water hole for the elephant outside of the confines of the place they don't want them to get to.
And sorry, this work is happening through funding and research being done at the zoo level.
Yes, right? That's right. So basically, where with the Zoological Society of London has people working all over the world. So what we can do is we can work with our colleagues and partners across the world, but use our understanding of the way animals behave that we've learned in the zoo. Mm-hmm. So it's a really good application of some of our zoo learning. So I work really closely with the elephant team at Whipsnade. They're amazing people. The changes that we've made in the way that we look after our animals, even in just the last decade, is profound. We're constantly looking at ways to make sure that we meet their wild behavioural needs. So just to give you an example, an elephant spends about 18 hours per day feeding and foraging. And in the old days, we would just present food in a very simplistic way to our animals, either in a bowl or on the ground, maybe just a bale of hay in a trough. Now we've actually managed through data collection to work out that we've managed to match. We got up to about 78% of that 18 hours feeding and foraging time. And we're doing it by modifying environments, making feeding opportunities challenging in the same way as they would be in the wild. Not exactly the same, because you cannot match the rainforest of Sri Lanka in Whipsnade on a cold and wet Wednesday, trust me. But we can give these animals the outcomes that they need. Behavioural needs it's an unusual thing. It's not necessarily exactly matching what it looks like for those animals in the wild. But those things like duration of feeding, the way that they feed, using all the different component parts of their body, the trunk and the feet to dig, all those things we can do in the zoos. And what we learn from all this working with these animals so closely is a deeper understanding of why animals do what they do in the wild. And then we can pass that information on to our colleagues and partners that are working in the field, who don't necessarily have a behaviour science background because they're conservation scientists. So we're working together to try and mitigate against human-animal conflicts in the wild, or human-wildlife conflict. And then, one of the most amazing programs that I've ever worked with that I loved was with our African wild dogs.
That's what my brain is ping-ponging, by the way.
Okay,
there's
good.
So many things for us to talk about. And I imagine if you're listening in or watching, your brain might be doing the same thing. But the wild dogs I wanted to talk about,
sure.
And also training to mitigate any stress on an animal based on some of the research and data points that you have as well. So I would love to hear about both of those things.
Yeah, and that goes back to my sort of passion for individual animal welfare as opposed to
larger outcomes.
The population management that we do in zoos, and they're both equally important in my view. Some people think, well, conservation's everything. We must breed animals because they're dying out in the wild, and we have this living arc so that when the habitats are protected, we can reintroduce animals. And we've got examples of that. We're doing it with invertebrates right now, snails out in the wild. We're putting reintroducing these animals, so it's happening. But from my perspective, I feel like my job is to look after those individual animals. But just to go back to the African wild dog, so we had our conservation research partners in Kenya were tracking African wild dogs, and the main reason they needed to track them was because of the impact of climate change on the way that they feed. So obviously they hunt in packs. Now what they would do is they would find wild dogs, and they would be able to anesthetize them humanely, so with a dart gun, and then put a tracking collar around them. And on that tracking collar had this incredible technology that was essentially an accelerometer. And so it could track them and work, and it sent data points back to the researchers to see what these dogs were up to. And the problem was they couldn't keep their eyes on these dogs the whole time. They range such long distances, and they burrow underground as well. So a lot of the time they couldn't match those data points that they were collecting to actual behavior. So they approached us alongside some colleagues in the University of Swansea to see whether we could attach the same collars to our zoo-housed African wild dogs in a humane and ethical way, and then be able to set up CCTV cameras so that we could watch them 24/7. So we could see every single behaviour and action they did in that 6-week cycle that we wanted to study. And then we could match all of those data points to the actual behaviours they were seeing in the zoo. And we were able to do it. Now, what was really interesting, the first time we did it, we had to do a health check on one of our female dogs. And so she was anaesthetised. And we thought, well, we'll try putting a collar on that dog. 24 hours it lasted and it was ripped off. And so we said, let's train them. If we can train them using our experiences of cooperative care training, which is all to do with choice, control, agency for the animal, and voluntary participation through positive reinforcement, then maybe we'll see whether these collars can stay on for a little bit longer. So we set up a habitat, which is down in the off-show area. So it's not a public viewing area. But what we were able to do was put a crate into the downstairs dens, and then teach the dogs to enter those crates, which is what we've done for many years with our welfare-based training, is to transport train our animals. We don't like to catch anything anymore or anaesthetize animals. If we want to transport them, we want to train them so they can voluntarily participate in that action and that procedure. So we just replicated that, but this was a bit different. We had to design a specially modified head cage for the dogs to pop their heads in so that then we could get access and actually put the collars around. And this is super dangerous because if you think about these dogs, they got a powerful bite. And
we had an episode about wild dogs. Yes,
they're scary.
And we talked about we've talked about their back, molars how they rip through flesh and meat. So
incredible.
Yes.
And the power in those animals. And, and you see sometimes if they have conflict, they don't feel pain. They're like so hard. They're hard as nails and brilliant animals, beautiful animals. If you've never seen one, they're sometimes called a painted dog for a reason. Gorgeous. Just because the cut, and every single one's got its own unique color scheme. So the keepers are amazing. We had 15 of them at one point, and the keepers knew every single one individually by their coloration.
Oh, that's
it was very cool. Anyway,
we love wild dogs here.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but for some reason, every conversation, or I would say 80% of our conversations somehow come back to wild dogs, no matter what the topic is. We just love,
they are a great animal.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorites that I've worked with for sure. Absolutely stunning. And we're really lucky because we've got this species at both London and Whipsnade. They're so crucial from a conservation breeding point of view that the zoo community knows that we have to help these animals.
Yeah,
they're suffering so much in the wild, right? So because of climate change a lot of the time, and
human-animal conflict.
Habitat loss. Yeah. So anyway, we managed to train these animals, and it was one of my favorite programs. I worked with a couple of great, 3 or 4 great keepers back then, Luke and Gemma and a couple of others, that we were able to finally get these collars on. And what was lovely was that we had a set criteria. We said in our ethical review, we review every training program for its ethical and welfare credentials. Every single training program inside a zoological collection in the UK or Ireland has to have one crucial key point, which I think is brilliant, that's been set out by DEFRA, so been set out by the government, which is to provide a net positive welfare benefit. What that means is that we can't just train an animal for the sake of it. We can't train an animal because we want to show it off or because we think it's fun. It has to provide a significant welfare impact. And so if we're doing it for conservation research, you've got to remember those dogs don't care about whether their species survives. That's not part of their kind of day-to-day reckoning. I must help my wild counterparts out there in Kenya. They just want to get on with their life and control outcomes. That's what that's what it's all about. So we have to find a way. And what we did is we realized that by gathering all this data, by attaching the collars, we would have a much deeper understanding of how these animals were living in the zoo and how then we could help provide better behavioural welfare by understanding them more. So we can study all that data and learn about them. But not only that, we're able to use the funding that we got for this project to design and build a crate that means that we could hand inject the animals rather than having to dart them, for example. So now we could train them to come into the crate. We could do the collar training if we wanted, but we could also inject for vaccinations and inject for anesthesia. So if we ever needed to do anything to do with a medical care point of view, it was completely stress-free. Those animals were fully cooperating in their own care. And that was all on the back of this brilliant conservation research program.
I mean, that is incredible. That is game-changing, I think. And I know this is starting to permeate into veterinary care as well. Yeah. Is that, I just want to know more about this. Like, is that something that you do with giraffes? Is that something you do with larger, elephants? Like, are you doing this with all sorts of animals, or is this something that you've just started with these wild dogs?
No. The wild dogs was a culmination of about a decade's work at ZSL of fine-tuning our training expertise, if you like. And what I'd like to point out here is that we didn't start this off. This is, there's a long history of training in zoos.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. No, it's called, there's a name for it, right? It's, I can't remember the name, the type of training that this is, or the type of...
Well, we utilize the principles of operant learning.
Okay.
Skinner described it as operant conditioning. So that's the free term contingency that we use to do all of our training. So it's the smallest meaningful unit of behavior analysis. Mm-hmm. You have an antecedent stimulus, so something that precedes behavior, that's sometimes called an occasioning stimulus. You have the behavior itself and you have the consequence. One element of operant learning is called positive reinforcement, where we give the animal something it likes for doing a behavior that we think is going to help it. So that's what we focus all of our training on. More recently, we've actually learned that lots of animals, although they like food and they want an appetitive after behavior to help them learn things, they also often want a little bit of distance from us. So that negative reinforcement, negative means removing, positive means adding. We utilize that as well quite a lot now in the zoo world. So if an animal is looking at us going, oh, I'm not sure about you, I'm not going to eat the food because I'm a little bit wary. They're wild animals. They don't necessarily have to like us or trust us. We go, fine. If you just stay calm, we'll give you some distance. We'll add a little bit and then watch for some, measurably calm behavior. That might be eating, and we'll give you some distance. And over time, then we can switch over to positive reinforcement, where we ask for behaviors that would benefit these animals' welfare and then reinforce it with food. That's the basic principles of everything we do in our zoo animal training. But there are lots of different types of learning that are going on every time you interact with an animal. So there's classical conditioning, which relies on reflex responses, habituation and sensitization that also rely on reflex responses. But in essence, we tend to focus on positive reinforcement training when we're asking for things like hand injections for anesthesia, vaccination. But and to answer your question, do we do this with other animals? So the wild dogs was that one, brilliant program that I wanted to share with you because it had a real meaningful impact with our colleagues in conservation research. And the end result was that the collars went on. The dogs had the criteria was really simple. We wanted to be able to put them on and take them off 10 times before we left them on. Does that make sense? So yes. We'd have come in, go away for 5 minutes, come back again. And that was our criteria. Once we were able to do that, we said, off you go, spend 6 weeks. And they did not touch those collars. So that was a really good evidence that the training that we did with them made them understand that this collar was something that to enjoy having on rather than it being forced on them.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Anyway, so we got all the data. We shared it with our colleagues in the University of Swansea and then our partners in Kenya that were working on the conservation research program. And it was a huge success. We love that, really proud of that program. And it was one of the first applications that we'd ever done at ZSL that had a meaningful impact on conservation research in the wild, so that was really, really encouraging. And so those dogs were real ambassadors for their species in the zoo, not just to, bring wonder and awe to our visitors, which is also an important thing, we think, in zoos. Animal training, like I said before, has been introduced to zoos for many, many years. There's some amazing pioneers, too many to name, that have actually been using this positive reinforcement training to improve the lives of animals in human care for decades. But in Europe, we've had one pioneer that has really helped us, and that's Annette Pedersen at Copenhagen Zoo, who founded the EASA, so the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, the Animal Training Working Group. And so we've been inspired by her work, both in Copenhagen and beyond. And what we've done at ZSL is try and mirror that, and try and take some of that, inspiration. And we think we've done, quite a lot with it and been able to formalize programs. And we've got, where we're lucky in the UK and Ireland, is our very, very strict government guidelines for zoo licensing, like the net welfare benefit for training. So we've been able to, bring all that to the table and really improve the lives of animals in our care at ZSL and beyond. We train everything from salamanders to elephants and everything in between. So what we're trying to do now is never have to manually catch an animal. Never had to have to, if we can get away without anesthetizing them, great, by doing things like conscious ultrasound with our gentle lemurs to check for pregnancy, auscultations, so stethoscope exams for gorillas. We'll take blood samples from our big cats through trained behaviour. If we have to anaesthetize them for routine, procedures or emergency procedures, then we train them to accept hand injections. We even have a specially designed, we call it an ICD, which is an induction chamber device for small mammals and birds. And we've used it about 500 times in the last decade with about 15 or 16 different species, from small monkeys like tamarins and marmosets all the way up to otters, everything in between. And that device is, we utilize positive reinforcement. We ask them to pop into this little chamber, and then we're able to anesthetize them without any kind of manual restraint at all. And all of these things are done in collaboration with our curator team, our vet team, and also, really importantly, the zookeepers, because they're the ones that understand these animals. They're the ones that work with them every single day, have got this huge amount of reinforcement history, which is what we call trust in the behaviour science world, in order to understand, how much can we ask these animals to do to benefit them. So yeah, it's been a great journey. And when I said salamanders, so we've been training the megafauna for a long time, elephants, gorillas, giraffes, things like that. We've got a history of training birds, mainly for free flight demonstrations, and we use that information to help the animals, the birds that we look after in the zoos. But yeah, I was so delighted a couple of years ago when I got my very first training program through from one of the keepers, Kim, who said, I really want to train our Chinese giant salamander. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. First amphibian that we'd ever tried to train in the zoo. And she sent a training program through. It's like, I want to train it to go into this crate. There's like a tray type thing that had holes drilled in it, so that when you lifted it out of the water, all the water drained out. I'll share a video. It's very cool.
Okay, I'd love to see that.
And I was like, it won't work. You need a tube, like a PVC pipe, so just to get it to target in there. And she completely ignored me, which I'm delighted, because the next thing I know, I'd got this, I was down there watching as they target trained a giant salamander to swim into this tray that then they could lift it out, weigh it, and then move it to another habitat if they needed to. I was blown away, because
I'm blown away by the fact that you've said that you can train
anything,
a salamander up through an elephant.
Anything. And it's all the same. It's the beautiful thing about behavior science is it's the natural law. It's a natural law. So it's like, it's not like it's not opinion based. This is pure evidence based application of science in animal care. And, it's been available to us since about 1940, 1950, but it was all originally mainly used for military training.
Right.
And then it came into the zoo world, much later on, sort of 60s, 70s. So, but big pioneers out there, dog trainers will know Karen Pryor, people like that have brought this out into the industry. So yeah, we're blessed to have this available to us now that we didn't have 30 years ago.
That is, I don't think many people know that exists in zoos. Okay. I'm sure there are many, but I don't think the general public knows. Mm-hmm. One thing that you've mentioned multiple times is the care for individual animals.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this, just essentially the thought of every singular animal life matters. And that's why I think so many of us do the work that we do, why we care so much about caring and working in the realm of animals and the animal world. I wonder if you've ever bonded with a specific animal. And I know, you were working in science and research and things like that. So it kind of sometimes takes away that emotion, but I do wonder if you've ever bonded with a specific animal.
Well, we're human beings, and we have emotional responses to circumstances, don't we? And I would say that it would take a very hard-hearted person not to have some kind of emotional response to animals that you work with on a day-to-day basis. But what I would say about that is that you have to be so careful, because there's something, that we know in the human world, compassion fatigue. And it's prevalent in the zoo industry as well, because animals live and they die. Some of them have short lifespans, much shorter than human beings. And so you're in this constant sort of wave of looking after animals and caring for these animals and putting everything into it. And things happen, it's just the way it goes. And so you have to be a little bit cautious of that, not letting yourself go, Is
there a story particular, to talk about beginnings and endings, but any particular animal that really tugged at your heart that you cared for?
Yeah, I think in the zoo, I've been very careful about this, but I couldn't have a pet at home for about 2 decades, because when I was young, I used to have birds. I used to keep birds at home. So I had this buzzard, and it sadly, one day died, and it was a tragic accident, but I just couldn't get over it. It was so hard that it really had a huge impact on me. Working in a zoo, and I'd worked in a farm for a while as well. So you kind of become a little bit more desensitized, if you like, to some of that emotional response. But there was one animal that I found very difficult when she died, which was a black and white ruffed lemur that I worked with. I used to, my first introduction to animal training and the use of operant learning to teach animals new skills was with animals that we used in demonstrations. And I'd worked with a wonderful team of people for a decade on these shows, so we would, our passion was to work closely with these wonderful animals, fully cooperative behaviors, and then show that to the public, share that experience and that joy and passion of nature with our public, and so that we could inspire an interest in nature. That was what our goal, our mission was. But of course, doing that, you're working really closely every single day with these amazing animals. And we had this beautiful black and white rough lemur called Jess. And she became very geriatric and had to be, we had to make a decision. Do we let her, she could potentially suffer if we let her carry on, or do we kind of move that forward a little bit with humane euthanasia? And this was the first animal that I'd ever trained to be hand injected for a welfare program. And I managed to get her to right to the end where the vet was able to hand inject. And on the day, the vet couldn't do it because Jess didn't want, that person there. She wanted me there. But I couldn't. I physically could not do that act. And so it had to be a colleague of mine that did that process. But fortunately, we gave her this end of life that was hugely humane, compared to, maybe a manual restraint episode or something like that.
Thank God for people and compassion and being able to give these animals a beautiful life. I feel such strong pulls to stories of people who love their animals, just because I know that there's people that handle grief for animals, for their pets, whether it's a lemur or a buzzard or a dog or what have you. And you can't help but, care, as you said, as a human being with a heart. So understand completely. We're at time, unfortunately.
But so fast. Oh, wow, that's so fast. Oh my God, we didn't cover everything, did we?
We covered a lot, actually, but I think there's a lot more to cover, so we could do a part 2. But I know one thing that I wanted to touch on before we end and get to your guessing of an animal noise is that the theory or the thought or the reality of what is truly a wild animal.
Yeah.
And what truly makes an animal wild in the world that we live in today. Because, obviously, animals in zoos in captivity in one way or another, but also there's so much in terms of human animal conflict that we see today. And you brought this topic up to me, and I just thought it was so profound. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about it for our listeners in terms of what that really means on a larger global scale.
Yeah, I think what I was sort of alluding to there was that for those people potentially that are slightly skeptical about zoos, which is justified. It's fine. I've got no problem with people everyone's entitled to their own opinions about things. I'd urge people to dig a little deeper, find out a little bit more about the work that we do in zoos and what we're trying to achieve, but also consider why we've got zoos. Zoos are now here because we have an obligation to wild animals to protect them. And unfortunately, we're not doing a great job of it. Humanity in the wild, we're in a extinction crisis. So zoos is one part of our toolkit to kind of protect these animals. Then when you look a little bit wider out into the wild, there's so few spaces now that are what we would call truly wild, wilderness. There's, wherever you go, we have got some kind of managed care, whether it's land management, changes in land use, even, some of these amazing parks in Africa, they are all managed with fences around them. So I just think that my perception, if you like, London zoos are very, very, it's an urban zoo with a small footprint. But what we do there, we do really, really well. The way that we set up our habitats. For example, we've just moved 10 colobus monkeys into an enormous aviary that used to house 150 birds, so it's vast. So we're moving towards those behaviourally diverse, enriched environments that allow animals to meet their behavioural needs. We're trying to provide, without matching the rainforest in Africa for those colobus, we're giving them, we're understanding more about what they need, what their behavioural needs are, how to fulfill behavioural welfare. And if you think about what the challenges that animals in the wild face, whether it's human-animal conflict, whether it's climate change, habitat loss, all these things, I think we need to be, as a collective species, human beings need to be pooling together and not fighting each other about what is right and wrong in terms of conservation and protecting species. So that's my personal opinion. And I think, I just urge people to maybe look a little bit deeper into how we're interacting with animals in this modern day environment, and how we can all work together to preserve these amazing animals for many more years to come. And I think zoos are going to play a part in that. I think they already have. We've seen species that are extinct in the wild be bred in zoos and then ready for reintroduction. I've got colleagues working in all over the world making this happen. So, and there's a huge amount of amazing zoos out there that are contributing to that. I would also say, find the zoos that aren't as good and call them out. Let's make that happen as well. And maybe that's part of the what we need to be doing in the future as well, is kind of ramping up the standard of all zoos and the way we look after animals and their principles, collectively.
I love that. If we have tools, as you say, in our toolkit to help animals at large, let's leverage them and make sure that they're up to a standard that your team is working within.
And many other zoos are too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Around the world.
Thank you so much, Jim. This is such an enlightening conversation.
Yeah, it's been great fun.
I'm very hopeful that listeners that are tuning in can be learning as much as I have about what's going on in zoos that I think maybe the general public just isn't fully aware of. And that care and compassion and dignity that you're giving to these animals that just isn't as widespread in the media. I'm really hopeful that we can share that information.
Oh yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. We've got such a incredible network in the UK and Ireland. We're so blessed. We've got really good legislation, licensing. We've me and my colleague Joe Mason, we developed a course that means that we're teaching zookeepers all over the country, England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, to care for their animals in this evidence-based way, with the animal training program that we're delivering. So, it's been, we're really trying to improve that and reach out to, many, many people and provide that continuity of care for the animals that we look after. And please come and see us at ZSL London and Whipsnade Zoo. 200 years we've been around this year.
I'm coming to visit. 200th anniversary.
Yeah, I'll give you a tour, definitely.
Cool. I would love that so much. Okay, well, before we end, as everyone who's listened knows, this is my favorite thing to do. I'm going to have you guess an animal noise.
This
I'm
is
not
going to be embarrassing, isn't it?
No, I think you're going to get this. But if you don't, it's still fine.
All right.
Okay. Are you ready? Hold on, it's still coming.
It's definitely a mammal. I'm going, wow, that's a really unusual sound because it sounds almost like equid-like, something like a hoofstock, but it also sounds a little bit like, I was watching my colleague Annetta in Copenhagen Zoo train a giant panda, and it sounded exactly like that. Did I get it?
That.
Oh,
yes.
wow, amazing.
Yes.
Awesome. That's
I know.
great.
It does sound like a sheep to me.
Yeah. That's
like
what
you would think.
Yeah.
I was going to try to throw you off a little bit because you are an expert. But yeah, you crushed it.
Well, that's big. Yeah. And when we're having our Zoom meetings, Annetta's office backs onto the panda habitat. So we're always like watching their panda wandering around and stuff. So, and she trained it to do this very cool behavior to check for COVID. You know, it's like swabbing of the nose. Yeah. So, yeah, very cool.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that a panda would be really cool because they are, a zoo-based animal in many regards. And also, the sound is just bizarre.
It's weird, isn't it?
You just I never thought that a panda would sound like that. So, learn lots of things.
I'm so glad.
Learning lots of things today.
Very chuffed that I managed to get that right.
You did a great job. Thank you so much, Jim. As I said, we learned so much today. If you want to hear more about the work that Jim is doing, we'll have tons of details in our show notes about ZSL, about Piazza.
Piazza.
I know I was going to butcher that. We'll include it in the show notes. If you want to hear more from Heart of the Wild, please check us out on our socials, heartofthewild.pod, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And as always, let the Heart of the Wild inspire not just awe, but action. I'm really butchering all the things today. As always, let the Heart of the Wild inspire not just awe, but action. And we will see you soon.
Bye. Thank you so much. That's been amazing. Thank you.
This is great.